we have Dr. Shiva, who is a U.S. Senate candidate in Massachusetts. How are you doing, Dr. Shiva?
I'm doing good. How do I address you, JP or JF or?
People call me JF very often in the US. All right, so I'd like you to take us through your story so that the audience who doesn't know you understand what you've done. Your CV is just amazing. You've been in all sorts of adventures. It's really fascinating to read about your life. You've delved into stuff that range from mathematics to computer programming to studying with Noam Chomsky and to, in fact, right now being a U.S. Senate candidate. Can you take us through the story of your life and how you got there?
Sure, JF. So, my journey is an interesting one, and it's not that different than probably the journey of most people. I think what's interesting for me is I went through sort of three major aspects of my journey. One is the aspect of immigration, then education, and what I call innovation. JF, I grew up in India, and in India, which many Indians don't even get to experience, because I experienced the India of two parts of India. India is a land, a world within world. So I was born in Bombay, which is now called Mumbai, India, a city that is, if New York is a melting pot, Bombay is an industrial furnace. So I grew up with all different kinds of religions, all different kinds of people, all different languages. But I also grew up in a very small village also in India, probably about 1/3 of my life, because my grandparents were poor village farmers. In fact, my grandparents worked, my grandmother worked 16, 17 hours in the field, growing cotton and rice in small subsistence farms. But on the weekends, JF, she was a healer. She had learned traditional systems of Indian medicine. We're not talking about biology. We're not talking about molecular biology, but before Western medicine existed, there were other systems of medicine. So on a weekend or a Saturday or Sunday, 30, 40 people would be lined up outside my grandmother's home. And she had the ability to diagnose people's ailments by observing their face very carefully. And then she would come up with different formulations of herbs or yoga or meditations to help heal them. So it was a personalized medical system. So as a kid, I was fascinated how this woman with no degrees was able to empirically heal people. But also, I grew up in India, which had a caste system. The caste system is fundamentally has nothing to do with what you do, but where you're born in society. So, as a child, I experienced some of the inequities of that. So I was very moved to understand political systems, why there was injustice, but also medical systems. So basically politics and medicine. My family moved to the United States in 1970. In those days, you had to, as a part of the legal immigration process, my mom and dad had to submit all their resumes, their reference letters. Both of them were very unique people at a time when none of them should ever have gotten educated. They did because of their very unique qualities. And we came here in 1970. We went through the public school systems of New Jersey. I settled in Paterson, New Jersey, which is one of the poorest cities in New Jersey. And every year and a half, my parents would move to the better school systems because that's the way my parents felt that you could liberate yourself. So by the time I went to Paterson, then Clifton and Parsippany and Livingston, each one of those school systems had higher property taxes. By the time I was 14, because of my intensity and wanting to achieve and how much I valued the educational system, not only was I good at athletics, but I had finished calculus by the 9th grade and got the opportunity to go to New York University, JF, at a time when computers were just starting to come. It was an intensive program where I learned 7 computer languages and graduated top of the class. It was an intensive, almost a military type program where 40 high school students were selected. After that, believe it or not, I got a full-time job working as a software engineer at a small medical school in the heart of Newark, New Jersey, which is predominantly African-American. And I met a great mentor, a physicist, but I was still doing high school, but he gave me a huge opportunity to invent what we know now as email. In those days, in many organizations in this medical school, there was a secretary in every office. The secretary had a desktop, inbox, outbox, folders. you may remember this, and they used to write a thing called a memo, to, from, subject, the carbon copy, put it in an envelope, and send it around the office. This is how you hired people. This is how you collaborated, separate from the telephone. And I was asked to convert that entire system into the electronic version. I called that system email. Not only did I call it email, but I invented email as we know it today, wrote the 50,000 lines of code. In fact, when I came to MIT in 1981, the president of MIT is the one who alerted me that I should copyright it, because the federal government did not recognize patents. But in 1980, you could copyright software. So on August 30th, 1982, as an 18-year-old kid, I was issued the first United States patent for copyright for email, officially recognizing me as the inventor of email. So that was my journey through the process of education. Went to MIT, always deeply interested, I said, in politics and medicine. In and out of MIT, did degrees in electrical engineering, deeply interested in medicine, but was very, very upset at the way Western medicine looked at the body, JF, because it looked at it in a reductionist way, as parts, not as a whole. So my focus became engineering, electrical engineering, did my master's in mechanical engineering, did another master's in design, and then later on did my PhD in biological engineering. But that spanned over 30 years, believe it or not. In and out of MIT, started 7 different companies, made a lot of money. But in 2003, when I came back to MIT, something interesting was taking place. Because of my love of computing and medicine, a new field emerged, which you may know of as a biologist, called systems biology. And the idea was Western medicine was recognizing that it had some major flaws, right? It thought it was looking at the world of biology as parts. And the idea was, we're not our genes. We're not, 100,000 genes. In fact, we only have 20,000 genes, the same as a worm. So what really makes a human potentially different than a worm is how molecular pathways work. So I came back to MIT in 2003 and did my PhD in creating a whole new technology for mathematically, mechanistically modeling any kind of disease, in fact, the human cell also. And I called that new invention CytoSolve. So if email was the electronic version of the interoffice communication system in electronic form, CytoSolve was the electronic version of the molecular communication system. So that was my journey through innovation. Interesting enough, JF, what's fascinating is in 2011, when my dear mom was dying of a horrible disease called pulmonary fibrosis, in a suitcase, this is now 35 years later, she had saved all of those documents and artifacts from 1978 when I invented the first email system. Time magazine looked at all of these artifacts, and they wrote an article called "The Man Who Invented Email." 3 months later, all of these materials were requested by the Smithsonian, which I donated to them. And what's fascinating is what occurs after that. Is that after it went into the Smithsonian, a number of Washington Post wrote a great article saying Shiva Ayyadurai honored as the inventor of email. And after that, the liberal elite, intelligentsia, who during those 35 years of the military-industrial complex had basically created a bogus history that they had created email when all they did was simple text messaging, got very, very angry when it went into the Smithsonian. It was like a new skull was found in Africa, which reset human evolution. So they started unleashing attacks, saying that there's no way this 14-year-old kid could have invented email, for that matter, in Newark, New Jersey. Because you see, the narrative is all great innovations must come from Silicon Valley or MIT. And in fact, I was on the front page of MIT for inventing many other things. But the notion that email could have been invented by a 14-year-old boy, an Indian American boy in Newark, New Jersey, throws a wrench into all of that. But the fact is that innovation occurs anytime, any place, by anybody. You don't have to go to MIT. In fact, MIT was frankly it was their benefit that they got me. In retrospect, I was already a trained software engineer. And that's what you start realizing. You start realizing that these big institutions have written big lies, that as though they are the hegemony of innovation and creativity, when in fact, most of this gets done by people. Innovation is basically solving a problem. I was trying to help a secretary go from the typewriter to the keyboard, not, simply send little did-dat telegraph messages. And that's what email is. But it brings a larger thing. That's why politics is so fascinating for me, is that we have a neo-caste system in America right now. And that caste system is run, the epicenter of that, I believe, is the academic institutions like Harvard, who believe that they are the only ones who are intelligent. And they are so insecure about who they are that they are the really the fake news behind the fake news, in my opinion. So if you think about it, these academics get together. It's pay to play science right now, right? A lot of people don't know about this. They write whatever narratives they want, and then the stupid journalists essentially do citations off what they write, and then Wikipedia, which is nothing about truth, essentially copies and cites what the journals say. So the good news is, they have I'm a formidable opponent because I know how this works. I have, all their degrees, so they don't really know what to do with me. So it's a lot of fun because, I still continue to innovate. The new company I've done is Cytosolve, where we're modeling large-scale pathways. We've spun off 7 different companies. We're going after all the major diseases in a very different way. So it's a lot of fun for me because I think the history, it has always been to bucket people, right? The mad scientist, right? Or the crazy artist. But when you really look at it, ultimately people who create are always solving a problem. It's not about being in any one of these kooky worlds. So I feel very fortunate to be able to run. And my goal is to inspire people to stand up on their own 2 feet and recognize that the notion of a lawyer or a lobbyist, I mean, what is law? I mean, it's really not a big profession when you really think about it. It doesn't take that much brains to become a lawyer. So we have a situation now that we do not value engineering. We don't value plumbers. We don't value electricians because the elite have diminished those because they are probably the most, in my view, them and next to Hollywood are the most insecure people, and they diminish everyone else and they falsely raise themselves up as though they are the ones who are the architects of society and they're the ones who are the smart ones. So we want to completely destroy that because I don't believe my parents left India, the caste system of India, to come to a neo-caste system. So I think it's a great opportunity to destroy all of that.
Awesome. Marcianus sends us a message. He says, claiming email as one of their inventions, red pill based Shiva about them. And the story you tell about people not being able to conceive of a 14 or 15-year-old programming something and creating something so great is the same I've been confronted to. When I was in high school, I made a Texas Instrument program that was giving all sorts of answers to the current questions that could happen at the exam. So much so that it spread and that now everyone in my high school still has this program because it literally does all of the calculus for you. It gives you the answer, but not the path to the answer. And many professors have told my younger brothers who came to the same school that they didn't believe JF could have done it himself. He must have had help from an adult. But I didn't. Now, on the question of your invention of female, I think there is some controversy, but I think there's not a fundamental questioning of the fact that you did something innovative that has participated to the progression of what became email. However, we should point out there was such a thing as text message being sent with some headers like to and from before you came in. And as a high school student, you've made a system that made email advance toward what it became, right?
Yeah, well, look at to and from is not what we're talking about. In fact, they didn't even call it email. To and from goes all the way back to the Morse code. All right, we're talking about the system. In fact, when they started attacking me in 2012, one of my students found an article. In fact, a 1977 report written by a guy called David Crocker, who's frankly crock of BS. He was attacking me. And, this is the way they like to attack you. Oh, you did something nice as a 14-year-old, but, nothing could have been created without collaboration. Well, in his December 1977 report, this guy Crocker writes, at this point, no attempt is being made to create an electronic version of the inter-office mail system. Email is the electronic version of a system. Simply sending text messages is not email. That would make Samuel Morse the inventor of email. In fact, they didn't call it email. They called it electronic messaging. I'm not the inventor of electronic messaging. I am the inventor of email, the system as we know it today. Inbox, outbox, folders, that entire, when you log into your email system today, you don't just do text messaging, right? That would, we call Facebook something very different than what we call Twitter. We're talking about email, the system. That is what I created. They had, look, these guys thought that the secretary was stupid. The reason that Crocker wrote that was because they were these little nerds who were just trying to pass electronic messages between two computers. In fact, that was done in radio type in 1939. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about the entire system. Inbox, outbox, folders, registered mail, BCC, CC, that's email. And I got the first copyright for it. And I called it email.
Does your contribution include the server side of email, what gathers these emails in center places and everything?
And all of it. It was client server. It was not a simple system. It was 50,000 lines of complete enterprise code. In fact, we did it in a relational database at the time. Okay, hierarchical relational database. In fact, we did things that now Google wants to do. An email message was only stored once. We never transported the entire message. So when I sent you an email, it was stored once. You got access to that entire message, and it was a remote procedure call. It was way advanced. Look, a 14-year-old kid invented TV in Franklin, Idaho. The heart of this issue is these guys, the behemoths, the military-industrial complex, has all these big guys thinking like only they can invent something. It's the biggest bullshit. The ARPANET guys have done so much effort into hype. There's a great article written by Michael Podlipsky, who wrote the RFCs, and it's a great essay called, and they argued all night, how BBN and the ARPANET guys would come together to claim credit for all this bullshit that they never did. They're the biggest hype artists. They didn't invent email. They never even thought email was possible. In fact, David Crocker's letter or document in December 1977 says it's almost impossible to create the electronic version of the interoffice mail system because you would have to satisfy all these users' needs. Remember, these guys were guys in white coats with huge mainframes, writing cryptic language. The notion of a secretary who was always a woman having access to the computer was inconceivable. So when I say I invented email, look, I never wanted credit for this, but when they said a curry-stained Indian should be beaten and hanged, when they started attacking me in 2011, when I merely put it in the Smithsonian, at this point, I am the inventor of email, and I will not only defend it, but I will go on the offensive on it because it's not about me. It's about the truth that innovation can occur anytime, any place by anybody. And the bigger issue is this, JF, look, the brainwashing that has occurred in America is the following, that we fund war, and everyone should listen to this, and of all of that, we should be so happy that we get inventions. And if you really dig deep into this, what you find is that wartime innovations have nothing to do with civilian innovations. In fact, it's a secondary market. Let me give you an example. In medicine, if you look at modern medicine, it has nothing to do with healing people or prevention. When Florence Nightingale was looking at the Crimean War and she was seeing soldiers dying on the field, she did one of the first statistical analysis. She wasn't just a nurse, which she showed that soldiers weren't dying on the field because of being shot, but when they came into the hospital. All right. So she created the modern healthcare system, hygiene. She had this vision that one day doctors would do clinical research. That created the modern healthcare system. But you got to understand, the goal of that system was to put the soldier back on the field. It was crisis management. Then, many years later, they started applying that system for what we today call healthcare. It has nothing to do with prevention. So this is what wartime systems do. They create something for war, then they try to come around and try to resell it for civilian use. Monsanto and Dow created the ability to drop herbicides from air. Well, when the military ended, what do? They try to reuse that for factory farming. Another example, the Haber process, which was done for fixation of nitrogen. Well, that was actually done for TNT. Well, when weapon sales were going down, they tried to tell us that we needed fertilizer. You see, the problem they have with email is it wasn't invented by them. And the inventor of it is still alive. And it was not a military innovation. Email was a civilian innovation. So this busts up all their lies that you have to fund war to get something civilian. You
I've
see what I'm
heard a
saying?
lot of memes along these lines. I've heard that the chocolate bar was invented for military people. The American people has been deceived for decades now into war.
Exactly. The bottom line, and this is why Eisenhower said, beware of the military-industrial academic complex. A Republican president, when he was leaving office, he waited until the last day so he wouldn't get shot, right? Then you had Fulbright, who was a Democrat. I was one of the Fulbright scholars, and Fulbright said the military-industrial academic complex. That's why the story and the truth about email is so viciously attacked by the white, liberal, racist left. Because they're the ones who claim they want to help darkies like me get off the plantation. So you see, when I was at MIT, I was on the front page of Technology Review when I invented Echo Mail when I was at MIT, front page when I won the Fulbright Award, front page when I first came to MIT. But when I said email was done before I came to MIT, that destroys their narrative. And I was part of their good Indian, right? Inclusivity and diversity. But when I said email was done before I came to MIT, I'm no longer a good Indian. You see, because the discriminatory narrative is Indians shake their head like this. They're peaceful, good Gandhians. They don't like me because I'm unwilling to be a good Indian. And that's what the truth is. So it's not like they did to and from headers. That's not email. I'm sorry. Email is the system. And that was invented by a 14-year-old Indian American kid in Newark, New Jersey, period.
I lived the same thing when I was in academia. Then there was something about me that interested media personalities, and I was getting into mainstream media, and a lot of contacts in the media world, they literally stopped talking to me the day I wasn't serving their leftist interest anymore.
Yeah, exactly. So the issue is, someone. I don't know if you know if people look at my tweets, about 6 months ago, someone, I don't know if you know, among the anti-establishment young people, they have this thing called Pepe the Frog. Okay. The left calls it, some racist thing.
Yeah.
Whatever. So one guy sent me a version of the frog, a brown frog called Gariépy. And I said, wow, it's pretty good artwork. One of my degrees is art and design. I do a lot of graphic design. So I took the frog and put Shiva for Senate, a circular thing below it. I said no to Monsanto. Why? Because a frog is a bellwether of nature. Well, when I put that up, it went viral. So the so-called left liberals attacked me as a racist. Think about that. A guy who's experienced racism, a bunch of white liberal racists calling me a racist. So we got the pins in recently, and I put it out, went viral on the internet. And a complete moron called Gerald Holt again calls me a racist.
He's also been targeting me a lot.
Yeah, so I tweeted out, and he was questioning my degrees. Here's a guy who probably studied homosexual studies or journalism or, bathroom studies, by the way, which I put on the same level. And so I said, where is his degrees from? What degree does he have to even question my credibility? And that went viral. And someone called me okay, and I'm going to use that word. Let me tell you why I think he said this guy is a. Now, so I tweeted back, we're all on the white liberal deep state reservation. And the reason, you see, what the white liberals have done is they have drawn a very nice bounded box of what is racism. So if you use a or if you change the name, so if you don't use that word, and if you change the name of things, suddenly you've solved racism. You see what I'm saying? And the truth is we're all on the white liberal deep state reservation. And that word we should all embrace and use. And this is why I think we should embrace it, because it goes at the true heart of racism. Racism is not ceremonial things of stopping using words, changing names. It's addressing the fundamental economic issues, which is we're all on a plantation of white liberalism, neoliberalism. And the epicenter of that is Harvard University, which is a $40 billion hedge fund, which is where Elizabeth Warren resides, which is where all the Republicans and Democrats come out of. So we're at a very important point. And I think our campaign is, we haven't even scratched the surface of what racism is. There's racism against poor white people. There's racism against poor blacks. Racism of what we've done to the Native Americans who still live on reservations. And that notion of racism is never discussed because a white liberal racist define it in 2 checkboxes. So they're the biggest racists.
To specify for the authorities monitoring us, both in Canada and at YouTube, the N-word was used here as a descriptive way to talk of his experience. So Dr. Shiva is talking of his experience, and his message is anti-racist in nature.
Yeah, if anything, people can. My entire life has been fighting racism. I was brought up as a dark-skinned, low-caste Indian, where we were called all sorts of names growing up in India. And, when I came to MIT, my friends were poor blacks, poor whites, and poor Hispanics. The Indians at MIT from India would always try to ask my last name because they were the biggest racists. So I made sure more poor blacks got into MIT, more poor whites. I ran some of the biggest demonstrations. There's a picture of me burning the South African flag. If people want to go to shivaforsenate.com and look at the timeline against the white liberal racists of MIT who were investing at that time in apartheid South Africa. So you're looking at someone who's fought racism all my life. And the fact that the nation, the fact like an idiot like Jared Holt, the fact that anyone would call me a racist, they're going to get probably a big lawsuit, including the Southern Poverty Law Center, which went to the extent of calling me a Nazi and a white supremacist when we face 40,000 people who are incited by them and Mayor Marty Walsh as though we were Nazis. So what we have is they have a huge problem with me because you're looking at a person who's fought racism, fought for poor people, fought for poor whites, who's going to expose them all. So,
and I will note that Dr. Shiva has been historically winning settlements in court before a trial even happens. I believe there was one story involving Gawker and Hulk Hogan.
Yeah, so remember I told you in 2012 when my stuff went into the Smithsonian, Gawker Media, which is really not even, I don't know what they are. They're a clickbaiting firm, like most of these journalists are. They would write garbage headlines just to get clickbaiting, claiming that they're journalists. Well, they called me all sorts of names, ASSHOLE, which led to other people saying this curry-stained Indian should be beaten and hanged. For 4 years, I couldn't find any lawyer to take the story. They said, oh, ha, you invented email, right? Al Gore story. Finally, Charles Harder, who had just won a major settlement for Hulk Hogan, Charles looked at my stuff and he goes, clearly you invented email. The facts are so obvious when anyone looks at it. And so we sued Gawker. I was the second person to sue for $35 million. And what was interesting was Gawker folded after my lawsuit. And the irony is that I was appointed the co-chairman of the bankruptcy committee to sell Gawker to Univision. So it's great karma. And I got close to $1 million settlement, and we put Gawker out of business. Now, some of these so-called quote unquote journalists, again, who probably got bachelor's degrees in bathroom studies, started attacking me as someone against the First Amendment. The First Amendment does not support untruthful speech, right? We're talking about true free speech. And that's what I stand for: free speech, but truthful free speech. So that was a big win for us. More recently, we have a sign on our bus which says only the real Indian can defeat the fake Indian.
I want to go through this. This is the statement of your campaign: defeat #fake Indian Elizabeth Warren. So for our audience who don't understand the reference, can you explain this story?
Yeah, so this is essentially how most academics are. You talk about, look, I've been out in Hollywood, I've been in academia. Academics, and all of you academics listening to me, so hopefully this is your way to redeem yourself, are the most insecure people you will find. Why? Because their future is really based on following a very meticulous path of pleasing everyone, okay? I can talk more about the tenure process, but Elizabeth Warren, when she applied to Harvard, she said that she was a Native American. For those of you who may know American history, the struggle of the 1960s was to ensure that minorities got a fair chance. One of the gains of that was affirmative action, sometimes what I think was a Band-Aid, but nonetheless, it was a gain of those movements, which was to equalize this disparity. So it was meant for minorities to get access to higher education, faculty, etc. Elizabeth Warren lied on her application, said she was a Native American, and that was fundamentally the basis of how she got into Harvard, her job. And by the way, that was around 1995. Around 1990, up until 1995, Elizabeth Warren registered as a Republican. After she came into Cambridge, changed her thing to become a Democrat, because that's what you got to do. You got to be part of the Democrat club. At least you have to have that liberal face here. And she got her job at Harvard. Her professorship, by the way, was the chair called the Leo Gottlieb Chair from the Cleary Gottlieb law firm, which is the same law firm which has direct connections to supporting some of the things with Madoff. Longer story. But anyway, Elizabeth Warren got her job at Harvard by lying that she was a Indian. So when I started my campaign in February of 2017 last year, we had a bunch of amazing students and local citizens who built a beautiful school bus to be our campaign bus. And the initial sign on the side of the bus was Shiva for Senate, be the light. 2 months later, in June 2017, JF, we changed the signage to be Shiva for Senate, fight for America. Again, by the way, this bus was used, parked in my parking lot, in my building that I own with my hard-earned money that we bought, and I pay almost $70,000 a year just in property tax. March of this year, 2018, before the St. Patrick's Day parade, we changed the slogan to only the real Indian can defeat the fake Indian. Two juxtaposed pictures, a picture of me and a picture of Warren in her headdress. People loved this, JF. We took it to the St. Patrick's Day parade. About 1 to 2 million people saw it. You guys can see the video. People are cheering us on. Well, 5 to 10 days later, we get a letter from the city of Cambridge. By the way, city of Cambridge, supposed to be the most liberal, intellectual elite, inclusive and diverse to all different thoughts, supposedly, says that they'd gotten anonymous complaints and that I was going to be fined $300 a day. Well,
for having a truck?
For having a truck with the signage, which said, only the real Indian can defeat the fake Indian. Now, you got to understand, the fine comes from the building inspector of Cambridge, who, by the way, turns out he's an Indian. Okay, we'll get to this, an Indian from India. Okay, so they have the house Indian try to rein in the field Indian, okay? Or Malcolm X would have said the house slave bringing in the field slave. It's a very interesting dynamic, right? So we looked at this and we said, wait a minute, the signage is not on my building. You're the building inspector. You have no right to rule on this. So we, on April 22nd, sued the city in federal court for violation of the First Amendment. And we sued them not only in violation of the U.S. Constitution, but also the Massachusetts Constitution. On May 4th, we escalated that lawsuit to the federal courts, saying that we were also going to sue them and ask for a preliminary injunction so they couldn't get 1 penny out of us during the lawsuit. Well, when we were about to do that, the city said, no, don't do this. And the reason they're afraid, JF, is because if we do that, and which we definitely win that within weeks, that it makes them look really stupid. But more importantly, our lawsuit would have become more interrogatories, more a jury trial potentially, right? And would have started getting information about Elizabeth Warren. Yeah. How was she connected? And they don't want any of this. So they wanted to call a negotiation. And they said, oh, can Dr. Shiva come in and meet with this other Indian guy? You see, this is the old plantation technique, right? It really is.
So they sent you the guy who was the inspector and who was Indian to kind of negotiate with you. It's like their agent.
Yeah, we said no way. In fact, one of my campaign strategists said, this is the old house, and wanted talking to the field end, and he was much more explicit about it because he's also a dark-skinned Indian guy who suffered all sorts of racism by the white liberals. So we said, no way. We said, in fact, here was our response to them. You have 48 hours to rescind the order, or we're going to go to the preliminary injunction. So they caved in, and then we started negotiating surrender terms, and we negotiated with them 3 surrender terms. 1, that they would never, ever fine us again for this or any other sign. Number 2, that they would drop the existing fines. And number 3, that they would never do this to any other vehicle. That First Amendment was not only on buildings, on vehicles, which was by the way of blurry law. They agreed to all of this. And then based on that, JF, we, by law, we have to dismiss our lawsuit, right? Because we're the plaintiffs. So we filed our dismissal. And in my declaration, I said, this is why. Now, what's interesting is one newspaper got it right, Washington Times, but the AP, which is a complete lackey to the bourgeois media, right? and the establishment said Shiva Ayyadurai drops his lawsuit, right? As though we had retracted back. Very clever. So also after we dismissed the lawsuit, then the city said, oh, we never agreed to these terms and wanted the judge to stop my declaration. Well, the judge dismissed it anyway, so they lost again. So the point is, they do not want to give credit when the house slave leaves a plantation. You see what I'm saying? Instead, they always, I'm being serious. This is a very important technique, how the white liberal racists try to keep people back on the reservation or their plantation. People need, whether you're white, whether you're black, you're red, or you're yellow, it's a racist model to keep us on the plantation. So I want to expand this term of racism beyond the white liberal thing of black and white. Racism is practiced. It's economic segregation of people of all color. I mean, white people in this country have been destroyed. If you look at the amount of the destruction that's taken on to poor whites in this country today suffer the most worst infant mortality. They're the ones who are doped up, eat all sorts of pesticide-ridden foods. And the average net worth, by the way, of a black person in Boston, net worth is $8. So what has Elizabeth Warren done? What has Marty Walsh done? What is, all these so-called, and they're all, by the way, Charlie Baker, all from Harvard, Mitt Romney, right? So they've created massive economic segregation for poor whites and poor blacks. And that's racism. They don't want to talk about that. They want to govern racism. Don't use the N word, right? Change the name of this building to this. Now you've absolved racism. They're complete hypocrites.
One of the first targets of the liberal system that you describe as a plantation, it's a great metaphor, are white people, right?
We should use the word reservation and plantation, because that's what they do. We live in everything we do is watch now. Facebook, right? Think about it. Google. We live on a white liberal racist plantation and reservation, physical and mental.
One of the first targets of this system are white people who are being denigrated in the media, who for liberals are an absolute target for reducing their birth rate, for attacking them, for judging them racially, for assuming that they are privileged when in fact most white people in the US, I assume, are of lower class. And so they get targeted, and white people are the first victims of racism from this leftist liberal gang.
Yeah, exactly. What they have done is they perpetrate race war, right? And what they want to do is they want the poor black and the poor white to fight. So the Democratic Party takes advantage of the poor black, and the Republican Party and the right wing takes advantage of the poor white. So I can tell you right here, the Boston Globe, which is the left liberal newspaper, interesting enough, when they published the 3 candidates running against Warren, they left my picture out, literally left it out, even though I was the first candidate to announce the most popular candidate. I tweeted out, racist Boston Globe leaves out the darkie. It went viral on the internet. The editor of the Globe said, Shiva, why are you calling me a racist? I said, look, you put the 3 white guys, you left the black guy out, dark guy out. What do you want me to say? So the left liberals and the left wing of the Democrats takes advantage of the poor blacks. The right wing and people like local radio show hosts, they act like they're Trumpers and so on, but they're actually take advantage of poor whites. The ultimate goal, they breed racism. They want the poor white to think that the poor black's the enemy, and they want the poor black to think the poor white is a redneck. This is how they operate. And that's how they keep people in check, while the bourgeoisie, the establishment, a lot of them 1 degree of separation out of Harvard, which is probably the most racist institution on the planet, which again, I keep repeating is a $40 billion hedge fund. And frankly, a fake university operates all of this. And the opportunity we have, JF, is the epicenter of that is, I can see Harvard right from where my home is, right? It's down the street here, right?
Okay, and so you live close to Harvard?
Yeah, I mean, our office is in Cambridge. We're behind. It's like, I feel like Luke Skywalker, going right into the Death Star. And that's what the opportunity with this election is. By an independent, by a real American, and also a real Indian winning, we blow away their narrative that you have to be in these 2 parties, that you cannot build a movement independent of them and win. And to everyone listening, that's what the opportunity is. My running, look, I don't have to do this. I have a multi-billion-dollar biotech company, which is doing really well, that I can run. But I hate these guys. These guys are the same people that pollute India and oppress people in India are the same people that oppress people right here in the inner cities of this country. It's the establishment is one. They profit from war and sickness, and war and sickness profits the Democrats, Republicans and Democrats. And we have a huge opportunity to bust that up with this election.
Now, you mentioned Harvard being a racist institution, and I largely agree. One of the things with Harvard and with the mainstream media and all of the system that you describe is, and even in fact, some of the journalists that you've named, a lot of them are Jews. Is that something that you've realized? Do you realize that there is an ethnocentric behavior from Jews in your nation?
Well, here's an interesting thing. Look, if someone went, and this is an interesting thing, people always do this analysis, right, of cultural backgrounds on discrimination, right? I mean, people should literally look at the Harvard faculty. I'm just talking about objectively, right? How many blacks are in the faculty? And you'll find very few. I mean, if you took a pyramid, who was washing all the urinals at Harvard University? Just do a racial profile and a religious profile of those people. Who is the professors and how many of them are? I ask people just to do a simple analysis of that, and the data will come out on what's actually going on in this country. We need to do it. But the deeper issue is, what is the nature of these people and what do they control? Well, they control three things. They control media, they control the banking industry, and they control, as a part of media and banking, academic knowledge. You see, in the Indian tradition, Buddha said this, I don't consider Buddha religious. He was a great wise man. He said, all suffering comes from ignorance, right? Ignorance is a source of all suffering. Well, how do you liberate yourself from suffering then? Well, you get enlightened. Well, how do you get enlightened? Well, you learn skills, you learn knowledge, you learn how the world operates. Well, that access to that knowledge should be free. But once you control that through what's called education and the priesthood, now what you've done is you've controlled access to your liberation or your suffering. And that's what these major universities do. And I think that's what's happened. Look, in India, we call them the Brahmins, okay? You have the priesthood. And I think the same elements that people have been fighting for centuries still exist. But I think what's happening now that's different than probably 2,000 years ago, I think because of the internet, because of media, two things are going on, JF. We have a huge opportunity for liberation. At the same time, a huge opportunity for even further darkness, further subjugation.
So could you take me through your platform and compare it to Elizabeth Warren? What are the points that you want to make in this campaign? And when is the vote?
Yeah, so the vote is in November. So first of all, let me just make this clear. Elizabeth Warren is the face of the establishment. People need to get this. Elizabeth Warren is the face of the establishment, Republican and or Democrat. If we think, we need to get the Democrat out and put a Republican in, this is the way that Tweedledee and Tweedledum works. Donald Trump, let's be very clear, he's not a Republican. His win, a lot of the 1 million people who voted for Donald Trump in Massachusetts and the millions across this country did not vote for Republicans. Okay, the Republicans and Democrats are the same, two sides of the same devil. They voted for him, and I can't read his mind, right? We don't know his exact intention. They voted for him because he was attacking the media, he was attacking Republicans and Democrats. He was the anti-establishment candidate. Now, I have no idea of what he has to play once he's in that swamp, but Donald Trump's win was like a shot that was fired in Lexington. What we need to do is expand and open up that anti-establishment movement. So the reason I'm saying this, it's really easy for me to attack Warren, and the fake Indian, real Indian, right? And I can do better than anyone. But if we simply stop there and we don't recognize that the Republicans and Democrats are two sides, we're going to completely give the establishment the opportunity to slime their way in. Do you know what I'm saying? So we need to understand that. So our campaign is declare your independence. The establishment is one. And the central thesis of our campaign philosophically is we need decentralization. Look, you're a biologist, as I understand, JF. If you go back, look at the term capitalism, right? It goes back to Adam Smith, right? Marxism, it goes back to Marx. If you ask the left or the right, where does the word fascism go? they'll sort of look at you. They don't know. Fascism goes to the counselor of Mussolini, right? Mussolini's counselor is the one who defined fascism. And interestingly enough, he used the human body. He mistakenly thought, oh, the human body is run by a central controller, which tells all the cells what to do. You and I know systems biology tells you that's very different. The cells actually are cooperative systems. They actually work on their own, and they're a self-organizing system. So our thing is that we need decentralization. The human body is 10 trillion cells that work in a decentralized way. So at the core of my view of the world is decentralization. That decentralization means that from the time you got up this morning, JF, and the time I got up, I probably made 100 decisions. Everyone listening on here probably made 100 decisions for themselves. They didn't need the state telling them what to do. So the bottom line is we believe in you. I trust you. Elizabeth Warren and the establishment believes they know better, right? Fundamental difference. I know you know better. You know, the body knows how to heal itself when it's fed the right foods. People actually know what is right for them. So that's the core. So the part of that core, once you get decentralization, and I think that's the way nature works. Nature is highly decentralized. It's not central command and control. In fact, what emerged out of biology, the old model, the Watson and Crick model, was you have DNA, central tells everything what to do. We know that's bullshit, right? The truth is that everything occurs at the edges, at the cell membrane, in fact, right? The nucleus is essentially storage. So if you follow that philosophy through, all the great things in life actually occur at the edges, by the deplorables, by the untouchables, right? Like email gets created in Newark, not by the center. So decentralization. So number one thing, we have 3 parts of our platform that emerge out of that. 3 petals: clean government, real jobs, real health. Well, clean government's only going to come if we bust up centralization and we get rid of all these career politicians. The founders of this country never wanted career politicians. You know, they were farmers, they were engineers, they were architects, they were doctors, they were scientists. None of these politicians, 99% of them, don't even know how anything in the body functions. They don't know systems theory. They don't know anything. We should fire them all. And the way we do that is term limits. 80% of Americans want term limits. We need voter IDs. Why is anyone able to go vote without a voter ID? We need campaign finance reform. You shouldn't need this much money to run, because 90% of the money goes to their colleagues and their insider trading. And my view is 2 terms, any office. If you were mayor in a small town, that's it. You're done. Go back to get a job. It doesn't matter what office you're in, 2 terms and you're done. Second part of our thing is real health. Well, health is going to emerge when we take care of our bodies. And as you know, and I know, food is the ultimate medicine, right? We have polluted our entire food supply. We've poisoned it by companies like Monsanto. We've destroyed it, and they BS everyone, telling them, oh, we need to save, again, it's a neo-missionary model. We need to go save the darkies in Africa and India. You know, that's not, you don't need genetically engineered foods for that. And it's a longer discussion. We can talk about that. I've done the research as a scientist. There is no safety assessment standards. The only people going to profit from this are people like the Gates Foundation, companies like Monsanto and Syngenta. We need to protect the public food supply, and that's going to come, again, through local farmers, local trade, no tax. The average age of a farmer in the United States is now 65 years old. We need to incent more vocational training in farming. You know, food tastes better when it's local. A fig coming from Turkey, which has been picked long before, I don't care if it's organic or not, industrialized organic, which is what Whole Foods and Amazon are doing, does not match decentralized, locally grown food. The third part of our thing is real jobs. You know, in the United States, we don't produce skilled labor anymore. We don't produce enough scientists. We don't produce enough engineers, plumbers, electricians. We need to unleash skilled labor. Look, I didn't need to go to MIT. MIT was frankly lucked out on me. You know, when I look back, my high school teachers, my mentors, I learned programming long before I came to MIT. And skills are what make people. You know, there's an old story in the Indian mythology which goes like this: the goddess of wealth, and there's a goddess of knowledge, goddess of wealth and the goddess of knowledge. A lot of people go pray to the goddess of wealth. Well, sometimes she'll give you some money, right? Depending on how she feels. But the goddess of wealth, some people don't know this, is very jealous of the goddess of knowledge. So if you go learn a skill, you go get knowledge, automatically wealth will come. And that's what we need to train people. What we've done in this country is we've elevated these Hollywood celebrities. We've elevated this priesthood of academia when we need to go back and say, what skill do you have? Do you know how to fix a lawnmower? Can you actually do anything with your life? If you didn't have all your prestige, what can you actually contribute? And that comes from skills. And that's where we create high paying jobs. What we've done in this country with illegal immigration, sanctuary cities sounds beautiful, doesn't it? Well, what the liberals have actually done is that's plantations. That's a plantation of migrant workers that they use so they can keep the costs low for themselves and others. The left and the right do not want to solve the illegal immigration issue because they want slavery. That's what they're doing with illegal immigrants. And they want to depress wages. So we have an overinflated stock market, which is basically a fictitious market.
On the matter of education, I agree with you. We have a problem where everyone has, most people in the country have delegated the idea of raising children to the state, and the state is doing a terrible job trying to fill their brain with everything, which is not needed and not efficient.
Yeah, I mean, look, if you go back to the 70s, in my view, before the Department of Education got involved, I learned more from my public high school systems, from these amazing teachers than I did at MIT. Seriously. And my high school teachers were given a lot more freedom. My math teacher, he had 3 curriculums for the slower students, for the normal students. And then he had another curriculum, which he said, you could study as hard as you want. And that's the one I did. That's allowed me to finish calculus. You see what I'm saying? The teachers need to be given power. Parents need to be given power. That's where you create good people. We need more mentors. That's what we need, not this concept of the state, right? What do a bunch of politicians know about education when 90% of them are uneducated and what they learn how to do is manipulate people, cheat, and lie? It's completely nonsense. We need to blow up the Department of Education. It's unnecessary. We don't need it. It has done nothing. And the teachers need to be given more power. Parents need to be given more power.
On the question of GMOs, you've spoken against GMO here, but you were involved to some extent in the GMO industry as part of the safety, understanding the safety of potential GMOs. Is that correct? And can you describe your role?
Yes. So look, so what happened was between 2003 and 2007, as I mentioned to you, when I came back to MIT, this was for my PhD, I created a technology which allows us to understand mathematically. It's not perfect, but allows us to look at any field and understand the molecular reactions. To put it simply, any biological phenomenon, you can think about it as like a big furnace of reactions. And so we created this technology to understand at the molecular level what was going on. That's CytoSolve. 2003 to 2007. During 2007 to 2012, I published a lot of papers using CytoSolve in major journals that are considered the prestigious journals to validate it. In 2014, one day I was walking down MIT's hallway and I saw this front page of what's called Technology Review. I've been on the front page of that. And this article it said, buy fresh, buy GMOs. Okay? Now you got to understand that slogan is actually a slogan of the local food movement, which is buy fresh, buy local. So I looked at this article and I said, what the hell's going on? And as I read the article, it was basically a propaganda campaign for Monsanto and the Gates Foundation, saying that the poor Africans and the poor Indians, right? Sound familiar? The old neo-missionary model need GMOs. Without them, they're all going to starve and die, which, by the way, is complete nonsense. So based on that, they say we need genetically engineered foods. All right? So I said, hey, why don't I use my technology to really understand genetically engineered foods? To put it simply, JF, if you and I wanted to create a genetically engineered blueberry today and put it out to the market, what a lot of people don't know is there are no safety assessment standards. So you and I can create a genetically engineered blueberry, and let's say there's the organic blueberry. Well, how do we get it out to the market? Well, you and I simply have to show that the genetically engineered blueberry and the the organic one are equivalent. It's called substantially equivalent. And the guideline that's used is a guideline that was created for medical devices in 1976. So the guideline says you and I get to choose self-reporting, whatever criteria we want, and we simply have to show they're equal, plus or minus 20%. In fact, we don't even have to show anyone. We just simply have to say we did some research, so we can choose water content, the color of the blueberry, and how much protein it has, okay? 3 variables. Now, that may have nothing to do with fundamentally showing the difference, meaning if you take a male and a female, and I told you, hey, choose whatever criteria you wanted to show that the male and the female are the same. Well, you could choose, oh, do they have hair or not? Do they have 2 legs or not, right? Do they have 2 eyes? And you say, oh yeah, they're the same. But the substantial difference is the XY chromosome, right? So what I said was, let us really analyze we looked at soy, genetically engineered soy and organic soy. The reason we chose soy is 97% of the soy in the United States is genetically engineered. So we literally mathematically modeled the molecular pathways of metabolism in plants. And what we discovered was in the genetically engineered soy versus the organic soy, in the genetically engineered soy, you would have 250% less of a very, very important critical chemical called glutathione, which you may know is a master antioxidant. Glutathione is like a detergent. Formaldehyde is produced, which is a carcinogen in the plant cell, and it's detoxified in normal conditions. But in the genetically engineered soy, we found out it would be 250% less. In fact, we wrote a series of 4 papers. We were attacked by a completely corrupt academic called Kevin Folta, who said, oh, I'm an independent academic. I don't get paid by Monsanto. A FOIA was done on Freedom of Information Act. He got paid $250,000 by Monsanto to be their spokesman. He was attacking me. By the way, he didn't attack me scientifically for publishing my foreign papers. He said, this guy's a fraud. He didn't invent email, okay? Anyway, we since then did another piece of research, our 5th paper. We found a paper that was published in London where people grew the soy plant in the greenhouse in vivo, and they found the same data, 250% less glutathione in the...
So your prediction was confirmed experimentally?
Exactly. Not only that, but we know why, you see? So what we're trying to say is, it's not pro or anti-GMO. It's like X-rays, right? It took many, many years for people to realize you needed shielding before you used X-rays. So what we're saying is, if you're going to go make a little itsy weeny teeny weeny change to something that nature has developed, it's a very fragile system. And you're saying, oh, don't worry, it's no big deal. Well, you're completely out of your mind. Engineers know this. If you build an airplane and you suddenly say, let me just change a propeller length to be a little bit bigger, you're going to get vibrations. You could blow up the airplane. So these people are lying to people. So what we found out was, because of the genetic engineering, the soy plant is actually weaker because it has less glutathione. Now, interestingly enough, I don't know if people know this. If you look at it, most genetically engineered seeds, they've started coating them with another toxin called a neonicotinoid. Okay. And the reason I think they've done this is when they plant the genetically engineered seed, like in the soil organisms can destroy it because it's frankly a weaker seed. So now they've coated it with neonics, and the neonics get into the plant, and those are affecting the bees. Now, this is not a conspiracy theory. We've published all of our data. We're willing to show all of our data online. If Monsanto wants to give us their papers, we'll embed it in and we'll rerun the models. The bottom line is there is no safety assessment standards for genetically engineered foods. It's all self-reporting. It's not like the FDA approves any of this. The FDA, in fact, just issues what's called a safety consultation letter. So for the blueberry you and I would want to do, JF, we simply tell them, hey, FDA, we've done some work. And they say, oh, thank you, JF and Shiva, for letting us know you've done it. So the whole thing is bogus. I just recently was in a movie with Pierce Brosnan, funded. He's the executive producer, and his wife, who's an amazing documentary filmmaker. I ended up being the chief scientist. Keely Brosnan says, Shiva, you're really the star of the movie, which I thank very humbly. But the movie really is about exposing what is going on in the western part of the island of Kauai, which since the Vietnam War, has been used as an open field test center where they've destroyed the native Hawaiians. You know, they get all sorts. By the way, Zuckerberg has bought a nice piece of property there, and he stole a lot of land from the Hawaiians, right? And he's built a nice wall, by the way, around his home. So,
All right. Well, it was great hearing you. I will be moving to 2 other guests, so it was really a pleasure. I think we can continue this discussion in the future, and the audience will be following your campaign in November. On the question of GMOs, I'm personally very worried, perhaps as a last thought, I'm very worried that humans will start editing the gene line, the germ cell line of human beings to improve themselves. And my book, The Revolutionary Phenotype, seeks to describe what are the potential consequences of this, which is extremely grave. So just before you go, what do you think about the potential GMO humans?
Well, here's the deal, right? You're talking about people who are completely have no knowledge of engineering. They lack the depth to understand nature. Has tested many things over billions and billions and billions and billions of years, right? So people who think they're going to go engineer a better human being are completely idiots. They have no idea what they're talking about. They don't have an engineering sensibility. And I would argue that these people are probably maniacs. And we probably should even be, it should be seen as a criminal behavior, right? Just as though we would see it as a criminal behavior if you suddenly started saying that you're going to simply change, a Boeing 747 jet structure and just put it out to the market overnight. We would all say no to that, right? This is one of the most serious engineering. And now I'm an engineer. Biologists are not engineers. They don't understand engineering. Computer scientists don't understand engineering. Nature is an engineer. So I think it's a very dangerous thing. And we need to stop these people. The Chinese will probably try to subvert it and do it some way. They're probably already doing it, right? Because there's no containment of them because they have a centralized planning model. At least in the United States, we may have some chance to do that, but I think it's absolutely dangerous and completely inane to do this. By the way, our campaign, if people want to help us, is shivaforsenate.com. Support us. As you can see, as I've said before, only a real Indian can defeat a fake Indian, and we mean that at many, many levels. Intellectually, from not only a slogan, but at a fundamental level, it's time that people got better. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much for being on the show. It was a pleasure, and we can talk later.
Thanks for having us. Thank you. Bye-bye.